How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be taking a look at Tales from the Darkside. This is Season 3, Episode 14, and this one's entitled My Ghostwriter, the Vampire. Which, yeah, there's a hyphen in the middle. I, at first, when I saw the hyphen, was wondering if it was going to be like a double episode with an A and B story. But no, it's My Ghostwriter, who is the vampire. So it's one story. Anyway, this came out February 1st, 1987, and is directed by series regular Frank DePalma. This episode stars Jeff Conaway, Roy Dotrice, and Jillie Mack. But also, and here's kind of an interesting thing, the teleplay is written by Peter O'Keefe based on a story by Scott Edelman, and the story originally appeared in DC Comics. Yeah, going through and watching Darkside, I did not expect that we would get a DC Comics adaptation, but here we are. The story definitely has an old school anthology comic feel behind it, and it is cool to see that they really are basing it off of a comic. Darkside pulls its source material from a ton of different authors all over the place, so why not do a actual comic book? Cool to see a DC adaptation in here. Anyway, this episode is about a writer who is not really talented, but offers a real vampire sanctuary in exchange for his stories. That's a good idea, and you see what I mean by classic anthology horror stuff. The whole idea of I'm doing something I probably shouldn't, but if I can just get away with it, I can really strike big and make it rich, but you know that he's kind of built himself a house of cards there. And that whole classic anthology stuff of combining things with horror. Take something that's interesting, but real world, like a writer. Combining that with something horror, a classic horror trope, like a classic monster, the vampire. That's a really good way to build yourself a classic anthology horror story. Add some twists, turns, backstabbing, and betrayal, and you get a really fun product. Yeah, like I said, this was originally published in DC Comics, but it really reminds me of lots of classic comics. Think EC Comics, think Tales from the Crypt. Later on, we would get Creepy Magazine, and then Creepshow would parody that. If you guys really like old school anthology comics, they're actually making new ones in this vein. Shudder Magazine and Vampirus Carmilla, two modern magazines keeping this old school tradition alive. And when I saw this story, I was like, hey, that reminds me a little bit of those. Overall, a really good, fun, classic comic book styled episode. I really did like it. I guess as far as flaws, though, it's what you can expect from the standard Darkside flaws, and that's going to be time and budget. This episode really had room to do a whole lot, and I mean, the obvious comparison when you hear this concept is it does seem very similar to Anne Rice's interview with the vampire. Now, I do want to say, I'm not sure which came out first. If it's based on a comic, then that would be pre-87 when the episode came out. But that's not really what I'm here to say. I'm just saying that with Anne Rice, a vampire telling his life story to someone who's going to write it down, that was a whole book series, a whole movie series, and now on AMC, a whole TV show. There's room to expand this. I mean, we're literally dealing with a 900-year life story. There's so many stories that I want to hear, and I mean, that's the plot of the episode. People wanted to hear the stories, but we only get a few stories told to us, and we don't really get any flashbacks, and that's where the budget comes in. We don't get flashbacks to all these cool stories, which I I really was kind of hoping for, but yeah, I mean, it's 80s TV, what can I expect? But, you know, it's basically just the framing mechanism. I could see this episode getting turned into a movie just by giving us some flashbacks, finding out the vampire's life, how he came here. That's all interesting stuff that I can see why it's not here, but I still wish it was, you know? So overall, though, it still is a good episode. It's just obviously not as big as it could have been, but who am I to expect more? I mean, it's 22 minutes of 80s TV budget. Anyway, in order to analyze this further, I do want to talk a bit about the plot. I'm not going to be doing any major spoilers. I'll be avoiding talking specifically about the end, stuff like that. But I do want to talk a bit about the plot. I do want to analyze it. So a little bit of analysis, no major spoilers though. So let's go ahead and dive into the plot. We open up with this writer. He's writing his book and he's narrating it out loud. And in the story, the main character is staking a vampire through the heart. Classic vampire fare, but he's interrupted by his assistant. The assistant says, "Hey, we just staked the last vampire through the heart. Why are we doing this again? Let's change it up." And she starts talking about all the other ways to kill a vampire, all the different lore, and he goes, we can just stake them. That's what you do. You stake vampires. And he goes on and writes the book how he wants to, but over the course of the next little bit, we find out who this assistant is. She's actually a consultant that he's hired because he doesn't know that much about vampire lore, and she does. So she's a lore consultant, which, boy, a lot of people would love that job nowadays. But she's a lore consultant, but later she would say that she was basically his ghostwriter. She said that she would read the books and feel like she was reading more of her own work than his, and that she's really the writer of these books, telling him how the supernatural works, explaining the plots and stuff, and basically just pushing him along. So he's untalented, but in addition to that, he keeps promising to introduce her to his agent, show the agent some of her work, which he isn't doing. So yeah, jerk behavior, keeping this girl down and using her. After she leaves though, a real vampire shows up at his window. And at first he thinks, okay, this guy is an obsessed fan, he's crazy, just send him away. But quite quickly, he proves he's the real deal. And he goes, okay, you're a vampire, I'm scared. What could you possibly want from me? And he goes over. There's a bust on the wall with an axe in his head, and he pulls it down to reveal a secret room. But this bust with the axe in it is actually some of the artwork that they used on the DVD menu for disc 2. And I was looking at that every time I put this disc in. I'm like, what is this weird head with the axe on it? And of course, it's not till the very last episode on disc 2 that we actually see where this thing came from. But when it finally pops up, I'm like, it's that thing from the DVD menu. But anyway, little bust on a floating shelf, axe in its head, push the axe down, bookshelf slides away, hidden room. Sliding bookshelves and vampires, we are going very classic horror here. The hidden room right now, he just has a safe in it, but the vampire says, I want to live here, I want your house for sanctuary, and he says, in exchange for sanctuary, I will tell you my stories, real vampire stories, authentic, the real deal, in exchange for sanctuary. And he, of course, takes the deal. Now, right away, things get kind of dark. His maid shows up, even though it's late at night, and the vampire says, will she be missed? And he says, no. And then he throws in this thing about how people will probably assume that immigration got her, and when she doesn't show up, they'll think she was simply deported. So yeah, he is being a huge jerk right from the beginning. And that's sort of the thing, is when I saw this concept, I thought, okay, he's probably going to be sitting at home and pretending he doesn't know what the vampire's doing when he goes out at night. But no, first night he's like, go ahead and murder my maid, which, killing aside, I mean, obviously killing is bad, don't kill people, but that's way too close to home. You think, wanting to stay under the radar, you would say, don't kill people I personally know, the police might trace it back to me, but no, he's just on board for the killing really quick. Classic anthology horror, you gotta have the jerks because you're secretly rooting that they get their comeuppance and their evil plan comes crashing down. So he was already a jerk with the assistant, but now he's crossed the line into villain territory. But anyway, the novel, of course, sells well. 900 Years of Darkness. The vampires lived for a long time. I mean, a normal person has some interesting stories in their life. What if you lived over 9 human lives, you know? So it sells really well, which does lead to a few things. A, the assistant says, there's no way you wrote this book. I know you too well. If somehow you did manage to write this, it was a fluke and you'll never be able to replicate it. But she suspects a ghostwriter and doesn't know how right she is. But also, after the success of the book and seeing his life stories told to everyone, the vampire starts to question their arrangement. He doesn't get any credit, and he doesn't get any of the profits. Which personally to me sounds kind of silly that a vampire would care about these things. Usually vampires are like, oh, I'm above petty human concerns. But no, he wants credit. And how would you do that? Putting in the credits the name of your supposedly fictional vampire? That would look really weird to have a character that's supposed to be fictional get the credit line. I mean, the only time I can think of this is like the original printings of John Dies at the End, because that book was into weird stuff like that. The author used the pen name of the main character in order to make it look like the book was more real as kind of a joke. But that's literally the only time I can think of a fictional character being credited. If you guys know more, definitely tell me. But yeah, how is he supposed to give a vampire credit in a story where the vampire is killing people? And also, they put the story of killing the maid in the book. Dude, be careful, the police might find you. But anyway, the vampire also wants his share of money, and I would like to say the deal was your stories in exchange for sanctuary. If you wanted a cut of the royalties, put that in the negotiation at the beginning, because you agreed to get paid in a place to hide while you ate people. You know, like, mention in the deal that you want royalties at the beginning and don't just want to change the deal later, but whatever. I won't spoil the end bit, but I will say it is a really fun end. Very classic anthology horror, twists and turns and backstabbing and betrayal, all that good stuff. But you can see the main character, I don't really want to call him protagonist, but main character is trying to keep the plate spinning, trying to pull it off, trying to make it big when you have a vampire that's upset at you, and you start to wonder, is he gonna forget something? Is he gonna mess something up? Will his tower of cards fall? And overall, a pretty fun, classically styled anthology story. Like I said, you don't actually get to see much of the vampire stories. There's no flashbacks. and I think you only hear like one or two, but it's still, even though it's just the framework for something that could be much larger, and even though I do want to hear those 900 years of stories, obviously we can't do that in just one episode, but what we got, classic anthology horror, and a classic monster. You know, Darkside doesn't do classic monsters that often, despite being anthology horror. Strangelove was the first vampire story. Then the beginning of season 3, we had The Circus, which was like a monster mash episode. But yeah, I think this is only like the third classic monster story, unless I'm forgetting something. So cool to see more classic monsters pop their head in. And overall, a really fun classic monster story, classic comic story. Overall, fun stuff. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping the channel out. I'll leave a relevant playlist on the bottom. This should be my Tales from the Darkside playlist. You should be able to find my reviews of all the past episodes in there, plus a Season 1 and 2 overview, as well as my review for the Joe Hill comic, and I covered the Clive Barker story early. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very soon. Darkside playlist on the bottom. Have a good day now.